It's nice to see all of you. I always love coming to Family Business Center events. I see lots of familiar faces from the HR Roundtable. My name's Carrie Urrutia. I've been practicing labor and employment law at Eastman Smith for going on 24 years now. So all I do is represent employers in every aspect of the employment relationship. I'm a litigator, so I handle cases once they get to court involving discrimination, harassment, FMLA, and everything in between. I advise on hiring and firing, safety, workers' comp. And despite all that, it's my honor to represent my clients in court. What I really, really love and what I'm excited to talk about today is to get in front of your companies and your supervisors and managers and try to prevent lawsuits, try to prevent claims. One of the very best ways to do that is to schedule some leadership and harassment training for your supervisors and managers. Typically, this is about a 2.5 to 3 hour session. Sometimes we do multiple shifts for those of you that have different shifts and different operations, but letting your supervisors and managers know that there are legal ramifications to being a supervisor or manager. It's not just a different title and getting paid on salary versus paid an hourly basis. They are agents of the company, and everything they say or do or see or fail to do or fail to say it can result in direct liability for the company. So I think a lot of supervisors and managers don't understand that they also have some skin in the game here. In Ohio, there's the potential for individual liability. And many supervisors and managers don't understand that based on what they do or fail to do, they could be named along with the company in a lawsuit. So I like to have a conversation with supervisors and managers and to let them know that this training isn't just to eliminate or reduce risk for the company, it's to reduce risk for them and to give them some tools in their toolbox so they understand, what's expected of them under your policy, what they should be saying or not saying, what they should be doing if they become aware of a situation in the workplace that could be harassment or discrimination. And all of those things together really do reduce the risk of lawsuits and claims. So much better to spend a few $1,000s on training than spending, $50, $75, $100,000 and year or more of your lives engaged in dealing with the lawsuit. So I'm excited to be here. I'm really informal. If you have questions, concerns, stories, just feel free to don't raise your hand, just speak up. Lots of costs to workplace harassment. And it's not just an economic cost that we're talking about for businesses. It's very evident that employees who experience harassment or other workplace misconduct are much more likely to leave your organization. We see good employees going elsewhere based upon the culture of a company or belief that the company, tolerates favoritism or doesn't consistently enforce the rules. And these things are, easily fixable and don't really cost a lot of money for the company to address, to improve the culture of your company and make an investment in your supervisors and managers. So we have a happier workforce where productivity isn't impacted. Obviously, harassment, drama of any kind in the workforce does impact employees' productivity. They're much more focused on what's going on with interpersonal relationships and other situations at work rather than doing their job, what they're prepared and paid to do for your company. The vast majority of us and employees generally have experienced or witnessed harassment in the workplace. I mean, the number is pretty staggering. It's over 70%. Employees hold supervisors and managers responsible for that. Not necessarily the president of the company or the HR director. There was a recent civility study conducted by SHRM, and the numbers were pretty astounding. Nearly 3/4 of employees agreed that managers and supervisors could do more to prevent workplace incivility. 68% agreed that managers and supervisors care more about business objectives than how people are treated in the workplace. And 62% of employees say that their supervisors and managers have ignored or not addressed instances of discrimination or harassment in the workplace. And, one of the things we'll talk about is, if one of your supervisors is aware of a situation that could be harassment or discrimination, it's just as if you, as the president of the company, is in the room and is watching it happen, just as if the employee, went into HR and made a formal written complaint. That's how much power your supervisors have to bind the organization. So lots of costs associated with harassment in the workplace. We're here today to talk about training, but before I conduct training for my clients, I like to look at the harassment policy. In some cases, I drafted it, so I'm very familiar with it. But I like to see the harassment policy and make sure it has all the bells and whistles that can protect you most effectively as a company. I mean, your harassment policy is probably the most important policy in your handbook. It should be more than a couple of paragraphs. It should be a couple of pages. And it should include all of the recommendations that the EEOC makes. I don't always agree with the EEOC, but I definitely agree with them when they say that to be effective, your harassment policies should do all of these things on this slide. It should clearly define misconduct. It's amazing when I talk to folks during harassment investigation who just don't really understand or appreciate the fact that what they're doing or saying in the workplace is wrong, or that it could contribute to a hostile work environment. People come to the workplace from all different backgrounds, all different experiences. And if you don't tell them, they don't necessarily know what they're supposed to do or not do. It has to be widely disseminated and communicated. It's great to have a written policy. I would recommend that the policy be in your handbook and that employees sign off on receiving it. And so you have a situation, you can demonstrate that, this employee was aware of your policy. There should be multiple avenues for reporting. This is really important. I don't like it when I get policies that say, if you experience harassment, you must report it to your immediate supervisor. If you're not happy with your immediate supervisor, you should go to your manager. If you're not happy with the manager, you can go to HR. No, there should be multiple avenues for reporting because, as many of you know, and I've experienced, a lot of people aren't going to go to their supervisor to report harassment because the supervisor might be part of the problem. So in order to be effective, there has to be multiple avenues to report. And this one is in bold here, and this is the one I don't see in a lot of new handbooks and policies that I look at to revise. It has to require supervisors and managers to report harassment. I include a provision, it's not just the right thing to do. Supervisors and managers need to understand that it is a condition of their continued employment with your company, that if they are aware of a situation, or if they see a situation, if somebody reports something to them, that they have an affirmative obligation to report it to human resources immediately, or their job could be in jeopardy. Another reason for them to do the right thing if they understand that, their job could be on the line if they don't. You have to make a promise to employees that you're going to make, take a prompt and effective investigation and what those investigation steps are going to look like. If you don't keep that promise, then you're not going to get the reports of harassment. And if employees don't report harassment to you, they're probably going to report it to the Civil Rights Commission or go out and seek a lawyer. It's much better for the employer to have the opportunity to deal with the situation and fix it within the organization before the employee seeks outside help. It has to explain the possible corrective action. There has to be teeth to the policy. If employees report egregious harassment and, 4 times the alleged harasser just gets a warning or a note to the file, that's probably not effective. There should be a range of punishment that fits the crime for employees who engage in workplace harassment. And it really has to prohibit retaliation. And your employees have to believe you when you tell them that if something is going on in the workplace, regardless of whether it's harassment or discrimination that you are uncomfortable with, our doors are open. You can always come to us and either complain or ask questions, and there will be no tolerance for any retaliation or adverse action taken against you for making that complaint. And that's something that we really drill with supervisors and managers, especially if they become aware that one of their employees has made some kind of complaint about them. So, look at your policies. If you don't have a good, solid, multi-page policy that hits all of these bells and whistles, you really should, have your counsel look at that and make some changes. There are tangible and intangible benefits to harassment training. Avoiding legal costs. I mean, I'm a fun person to hang out with, but employers, my clients would rather spend, $5,000 for me to come out and train their workforce than put me on the payroll for 2.5 years in some cases to see a litigation through from start to finish. It's expensive. I mean, it's ridiculously expensive, and it distracts you. And nobody likes to sit for a deposition and be interrogated by an employee's lawyer. So anything you can do to make the risk of litigation, to lessen that risk of litigation is definitely going to be a good investment of your funds. There are lots of damages that employees are entitled to if they can prove harassment or discrimination in the workplace. It's not just back pay, it's back pay, front pay, pain and suffering damages, punitive damages, and they're also going to be entitled to their attorney's fees if they're successful. So in addition to paying your attorney, the employer would be responsible for paying the other side's attorney as well. Lawsuits are public, and some allegations are pretty egregious and awful and ugly. And most clients, especially if they're untrue, are very upset that a public, lawsuit has been filed against the company. We know that the benefit of retention is real. If you engage with employees in good faith and early to help them resolve issues they're having, good employees are going to stick around. And sometimes a harassment policy and training can be a get out of jail free card. If you have a policy that's good and you have trained your workforce about how to report harassment, and you have an employee who, instead of reporting it internally, goes to, a lawyer and files a lawsuit, I'm going to be able to get that dismissed pretty quickly because courts understand, and the law says that you have the opportunity as the employer to fix the problem first. If you don't do a good job or a good enough job, then, the employee can go to the Civil Rights Commission, can go to a lawyer. But if you have that policy and employees are aware of how to use it, and they, don't use it, then that can be a defense. There are lots of benefits reported by employees. They're very appreciative. Supervisors and managers are very appreciative of the training because, a lot of times none of the stuff that we talk about has ever been said to them before. They see harassment training as just a benefit to the company. It's boring. It's either a videotape or a lot of legalese that is not engaging. It doesn't talk about real world situations and how these situations can manifest day to day. Having those additional tools in their toolbox makes them a better supervisor and, much better, leader for your organization. It increases the likelihood that people are going to complain about harassment and discrimination. That sounds counterintuitive, right? Do we really want more complaints? But the answer is yes. I mean, you want the complaints to come to you. You want to fix small problems early before they don't become big problems and could potentially be a situation involving harassment or discrimination. The EEOC has also made some recommendations with regard to training, and there's some recent harassment guidance, newest guidance in more than 25 years from the EEOC, and they say that good training should explain your policy and complaint process, describe the prohibited conduct, provide information to employees about what they should do if they experience or witness misconduct in the workplace. clearly identify expectations of supervisors and managers, should be tailored to your specific workplace. The training I do is going to be different for a bank client than it is for a manufacturing client. The scenarios I use with supervisors and managers are going to be very different depending on the type of workforce, the type of culture of the company, the type of problem that the company has. You don't want to spend a whole bunch of time addressing one issue in training if that's an issue that doesn't really impact your company. So really learning about the company, understanding what problems you're experiencing and addressing those specific problems to hopefully correct them on a going forward basis. It should be provided regularly to employees. I think that every couple of years, training your supervisors and managers, that training session, I think, to be effective is usually about 2.5 hours, 3 hours, depending on who you're talking to. Some employers like me to also train the regular workforce. These are separate sessions, and that's much shorter. That's about an hour. Other clients like me to come in and do the supervisor and manager training, and then they like to roll out the training to the employees. Because essentially the employees, you just want to make sure they're aware of the policy, that they understand how to report harassment and discrimination, and that you can demonstrate that they've received training in some manner. And it should be provided in a clear, easy to understand style and format. I think that there are probably more than 10, but I find that there are 10 components to effective training. I don't think you should pay for a canned presentation that lots of employers can order off the internet. I don't think those are particularly useful. I think it's much more effective to have a human being, engage with your supervisors and managers, and hopefully an engaging human being, not a lawyer that's just going to lecture them about the legalese and put them all to sleep. But to really provide some useful examples and some things that they can employ immediately to make them better supervisors and managers. In-person is so much more effective, so much more engaging for your supervisors and managers. I think it's important to talk to HR and talk to leadership before the training. So I have a good idea of, what are the issues in your workforce? Do you have problems with confidentiality? Do you have problems with gossip? Do you have problems with a lack of professionalism? Do you have supervisors who are, yelling and screaming and not conducting themselves appropriately in the workforce? And we can tailor some of the scenarios that are included in the session to directly relate to, scrubbing out the names of people who have been involved in prior situations, but, really make it relevant to the company. The best compliment I receive, supervisors, they see this on their calendar. They're like, oh my God, I've got to go to training. But, they often come up after and say, hey, thank you. I was dreading coming to this. I learned some things and you kept me awake. And, having a room of awake supervisors when they're just getting off the night shift is always a good thing when you're the trainer. So I'm really informal. I think it's, it makes a trainer better to avoid legalese. Nobody likes to listen to lawyers. Nobody likes to hang out with lawyers. Courts and lawyers have been arguing about the legal definition of harassment for forever, and we will forever. So you have to just move away from saying, we prohibit all illegal harassment at this company. What the heck does that mean? What is illegal harassment? I use 4 words when I train. The first 2 are respect and dignity. We want a culture at this company where all employees are treated with respect and dignity. We require it of each other. We expect it from you. And when I talk about harassment, I don't go into the legal definition of quid pro quo harassment versus hostile work environment harassment. I define harassment in 2 words that everybody understands: conduct that's unwelcome and offensive. If an employee is experiencing conduct in the workplace that's unwelcome or offensive, we want to know about it. We don't care if it's the result of a protected characteristic or if it, rises to the level of illegal harassment. Your policies, if it says we prevent illegal harassment here at the company, I would challenge you to update that and go a little bit further, because if employees feel comfortable coming to you with every issue that, where they're not treated with respect and dignity, or if they're experiencing conduct that's unwelcome and offensive, you capture it all. I mean, you deal with the petty stuff, you deal with the interpersonal conflicts, but you also can deal with the things that, while it might not be illegal harassment or illegal discrimination yet, it's going to get there if you don't engage early. So respect and dignity, unwelcome or offensive. If you see or experience behavior that's unwelcome and offensive, we want to know about it. So to the extent you can relate or find a trainer that relates well with your employees and your supervisors and managers, that's going to be a much better and more effective training session. Got to get buy-in from the top. If you want to change the culture of your organization, if you want to maintain the culture of your organization, you have to get buy-in from leadership. I like the plant manager to be present at the supervisor and manager training. I like the president of the company to be present at the supervisor and manager training to the extent that's possible. Culture is more than just keywords. It really does result in an investment of time and commitment from company leadership. There was a SHRM study on the costs associated with toxic workplace culture, and nearly half of employees, 49% of employees, have thought about leaving their current organization, while nearly 1 in 5 have actually left the job due to the fit, the culture at the company, negativity, feeling like, supervisors and managers aren't listening to them or are treating them unfairly. 76% of employees say their manager sets the culture. And yet 36% of those employees say their manager doesn't really know how to lead a team. So making sure that supervisors and managers have tools in their toolbox, realize that there are incentives other than just keeping their job and making the company happy, that should, change perhaps the way they interact with employees, or, they may realize, oh my goodness, I've said some of those things, I've done some of those things. So it provides some opportunities for self-reflection and, implementing some immediate changes in the way you interact with your employees by doing training and engaging in role playing, will happen in good training. Supervisors and managers are why good employees leave your company or stay with your company. Leadership from the top down, commitment from the top down is key. Like I said, I've been doing this for almost 24 years, and I'm often surprised at the new and interesting ways employees find to make each other miserable in the workforce. How disgusting can you be? How gross can you be? How can it be 2025 and you think you can still say that at work and not get fired? I mean, it's job security for human resources. I'll tell you that, because when we're dealing with humans, it's so unpredictable. It's like, what? I have the best stories. I mean, they're better than what you see on TV, because you can't know what people are going to do or not going to do. And this survey I thought was pretty interesting. It's hard to see, but there are several different types of inappropriate behavior, usually inappropriate sexual behavior, and polls of men and women, asking them whether they think this behavior constitutes harassment. And we can't get agreement on any of these things. I mean, unwanted physical contact, suggestive remarks, conversations about sex, jokes of a sexual nature, displaying sexual offensive materials at work, unwanted comments about clothing or appearance, invasion of personal space, staring and leering, comments about sexual orientation or gender identity. I mean, some of these responses are in the low 60s, in the upper 50s. It's like, all of these things can contribute to a hostile work environment. You can't assume employees know what's acceptable and not acceptable at work. And this is especially important for newer supervisors and managers. Perhaps you've had somebody who's worked up the ranks and, they're friends with all of the hourly employees, but now they're the boss, right? They can't engage the same way they did before, because if a supervisor or manager is engaging in inappropriate behavior, that can result in direct liability for the company. There's a different standard, a much lesser standard for, conduct that is, engaged in by your hourly employees. We're responsible only if we knew or should have known of the situation and failed to take action. But if the supervisor does it, if the supervisor says it, I mean, that generally means the company is on the hook. So, in addition to doing training, I also do harassment investigations, and I talk to the person who's complained about harassment. I talk to the person who's been accused of harassment. And when I talk to the person who has been accused of harassment, what do you think, other than denying the conduct, the most common response is from the alleged harasser?
I didn't think it would be I didn't think it was offensive.
I didn't think it was offensive. Yeah, that's common. I didn't know I couldn't do that. Yep.
It was a joke.
That's it. It's a joke. Oh my God. She needs to get a sense of humor. Why is everybody so sensitive these days? Can't say anything at work. Jokes play a role in about 98% of harassment claims. And it's no defense to say, well, she's just super sensitive. I didn't mean to offend anybody that joke. They need to get a sense of humor, jokes, especially when, they're part of a text or an email or, an I am at work. They're not really very funny when they have an exhibit sticker on them and the joke teller. And in a lot of cases, it's the president of the company who's sending a cartoon or a joke to all. And it's like, oh my God. You can't control necessarily what those above you do, but it's really important for supervisors and managers to know that jokes, particularly jokes that are about some protected classification, race, sex, sexual orientation, religion, those can and will contribute to a hostile work environment. They are not a defense, and they are a pretty common fact pattern with these types of claims. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I can. Have you found, because I know when we do our trainings, a lot of the responses we get are also impacted generationally.
Oh,
what is
sure.
acceptable, what's not acceptable, right? I mean, we hear that when we do these trainings.
Right. So I see that in multiple different ways. I see younger employees shocked that, oh my God, I can't do that. Like, I didn't think there was anything wrong with that. And I also see older employees, and I'm making lots of generalizations like, oh my God, we've always said things like that. I mean, that's just kind of how we talk. That's shop talk. Okay. Well, I mean, it might get you elected president, but it's definitely not acceptable at work, especially if you're the supervisor or manager. And those are the people that I typically get the most pushback from. Times have changed. The risks are greater for employers. The risks are greater for supervisors and managers. I'm not trying to dictate, what you say or do, or the conversations you like to have, or the posts you like to post outside of work. But at work, we're not going to make those comments. We're not going to say those things anymore. I mean, we all agree that, racist remarks, sexist remarks, I mean, those will result in liability, almost every time if you're allowing those comments to continue and they're made by supervisors and managers. I mean, everybody understands that using the N-word is, going to result in liability. But, when I first started practicing, it wouldn't be unusual. I'm not suggesting it was ever right, but for people to use offensive terms like, using the word gay as a pejorative, this is so gay, or oh my God, he's such a fag. Now those types of comments that we have broader protected characteristics and classifications, those types of comments should be just as unacceptable in your workplace as, calling a woman a bitch or using the N-word. So, culturally we see differences, ages we see differences, and we just have to communicate with people where they are and, address these things during the training to make sure that your supervisors and managers, A, aren't making these comments, and B, know how to deal with it when they see it. Knock it off, can't talk like that at work. And depending on how severe the situation is, they can shoot HR an email saying, hey, I heard this today. This is how I intervened. Just wanted to let you know what happened. And then boom, they've done everything they're required to do. They can get back to their duties within the company. Yeah.
Speaking of, how do you train different cultures where something is acceptable and then somebody else that's not in the culture uses it, you just mentioned.
Yeah, so I've got have lots of situations where, you know, African-American employees use the N-word to refer to each other. And they say, well, it's not, you know, it's not offensive. It's not unwelcome because we were willing participants in the conversation. You can still say, listen, that language is offensive to everyone else around you, and it violates our policy. So you're not using it, you know? I don't make exceptions for, you know, there are cultures that say, you know, I don't know, there's lots of cultural things that could be, you know, discriminatory, or could create a hostile work environment, that you just can't permit in the workplace. And that's one that comes immediately to my mind. Did you have?
Music fall in that category?
Well, if you permit music, yeah, I mean, I think it, you know, having music that's really explicit, that uses derogatory language or terms, I think, you know, that in and of itself is probably not going to buy you a lawsuit and ring the bell, if employees are allowed to listen to music, but, you know, it certainly can contribute to a hostile work environment. So, you know, if employees are allowed to listen to music, I would, make it known that it has to be music that's not explicit, you know, unless you allow them to listen with an earbud and then they can listen to whatever the heck they want to listen to. But yeah. Your training should address more than just sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is still alive and real and you need to address it. But most of the harassment, I thought about it last night, most of the harassment cases that I'm defending right now aren't sexual harassment. You know, I have a couple of race harassment cases, age harassment case. So employees need to understand that, you know, respect and dignity is not just a sexual harassment thing. And that, you know, your policies have to prohibit harassment and discrimination on the basis of all sorts of things: age, race, religion, disability, national origin, sexual orientation, et cetera. And, you know, folks who believe they've been treated, you know, differently, or, you know, have been the recipient of unwelcome or offensive conduct, even if it's not based upon sex or sexual, any sexual orientation, can also report that. And you need to make your supervisors and managers aware of that during the training session, and address how these situations present themselves in the real world. You can't just say, you know, employees can report age discrimination or age harassment. You know, I talk to supervisors about these cases, and, you know, age-based nicknames can get you in trouble. Gramps, Pops. You know, it's all fun and games and everybody's a willing participant until the employee loses his job or is part of a reduction in force. And they take their severance agreement to an employee's attorney, and the attorney, you know, doesn't, you know, sees that the employee is older and says, well, has anyone ever made any comments about your age? Has anybody, you know, oh yeah, people would joke about, isn't it about time you retire? You know, calling people old man, dinosaur, Pops. I mean, those types of nicknames that have any connection with someone's protected characteristic are probably, well, they're not probably, they're inappropriate, and they've gotten a lot of, you know, companies in some hot water over, even when you have a legitimate non-discriminatory reason to terminate somebody, the employee can say, well, that's not the real reason. And I believe it's really because of my religion, because, you know, this comment was made, this comment was made, this comment was made, you know, and my supervisor said this and that. And the court's going to say, listen, you know, employer, you did have a legitimate reason to fire this person, but they've presented enough evidence that, you know, we're not going to dismiss this lawsuit right now. We're going to let a jury decide, right? You don't want a jury to decide. You don't want strangers to figure out what your motivation was. And if you've got all that extraneous stuff going on in the background, it makes it much harder for the attorney to get the case dismissed early on. This has changed everything. Everything. I mean, when I first started practicing law, harassment could, in most cases, be a he said, she said proposition, right? He said, I called him a derogatory name. I say he called me a a bitch. You know, the language in these cases is often bad, so I've heard it all. So we'll use that. You know, he called me a bitch, and we're all brought to human resources, and you know, the employee says, "Oh my God, I didn't say that. I would never say that. I've got daughters and a wife. You know, I respect women." And what is human resources to do in a situation like that? Right? They can't substantiate it, so they tell them, "Listen, if that language was used, it's inappropriate. You got to treat each other with respect and dignity. You know, we couldn't corroborate your complaint, but let us know if you have any other problems." Now, you know, someone might not feel comfortable calling me a bitch to my face, but they're going to put it in writing in a way that never, ever, ever goes away. I mean, there's no way to triple dog delete stuff that is in an email or an instant message or a text message or a social media post. There are, you know, thriving industries that all they do is, you know, help litigants with electronic discovery in lawsuits. And it can be used as a sword or a shield. You know, I also get access to the employees' text messages that are relevant to the case. And we come up with a set of search terms, and it doesn't matter if it's your work email, doesn't matter if it's your personal cell phone, your work cell phone, your Gmail account, your Eastman Smith account. When intent is the issue, all of those communications, regardless of the method in which they're sent or stored or to whom they're sent, unless they're sent to an attorney, are fair game. So, you know, lots of bad facts when a supervisor is sued along with the company, and the company picks up the defense for the supervisor saying, "Look, you know, we've done our investigation and we don't," you know, he denies it, she denies it. There's no evidence contrary. And then, you know, I talk to the supervisor or manager to kind of feel them out. And I say, "Well, you know, they seem pretty credible to me. I think we can, you know, defend them as part of this lawsuit." And then 7 months down the road, after you spent tens of thousands of dollars, we get the electronic discovery. And it's like, oh my God. The supervisor not only said the thing they were accused of saying, but said all sorts of other bad things. And that's just a get out your checkbook situation. And it could result in, you know, the supervisor's probably going to get fired. The supervisor could be sued in his or her own individual capacity. And if they've engaged in bad behavior, the company's not going to pick up the tab or pay for their defense. And it's just awful. I can use it as a sword. I've had so many cases where, you know, employees, they're not always the smartest, right? I mean, they claim, you know, something was offensive and unwelcome. And then, you know, you get the electronic discovery and you see that they're the ringleader, right? I mean, they've engaged in way worse behavior than they're accusing other people of engaging in. And that's a great way to get a case dismissed pretty quickly, is, you know, once I get those emails and text messages, I just send them over to opposing counsel and say, "You want to rethink this case?" And I've been successful getting people to voluntarily dismiss cases that they otherwise thought were a good case based upon, you know, their client's conduct or statements.
So what would be the parameters of that? I mean,
Say that again, I'm sorry.
okay, well, I say that I'm the owner of the company, my supervisor is engaging in, I mean, that's behavior that we don't know. I mean, like you said, they seem like they wouldn't say anything like that, but I'm not monitoring someone's Facebook or like what will be the.
When you make someone a supervisor or manager, you have to be careful about who you're making a supervisor or manager, because their conduct is as impactful from a legal standpoint as what the president of the company does or the director of human resources does. So, you know, my advice to supervisors and managers is, if you don't want an exhibit sticker on this communication, or if you would really not want the HR director to see this communication, you shouldn't make the communication, especially in a way that can never be, I mean, we go through old phones and deleted, and, you know, that stuff exists forever. And, you know, even if for some of my clients think they have this like automatic deletion policy, but when we get into electronic discovery, you would be just surprised at what is still out there. So it's a careful decision a company has to make when deciding who can be their supervisor or manager. And I think, you know, spending a few $1,000s, having somebody sit down with them to explain this, these responsibilities that come along with being a supervisor or manager is definitely important. Or you could run into a situation just like this. Like, I had no idea that my supervisor was doing these things. And as soon as I found out, I fired them. But that's not a defense in court if we're talking about the conduct of a supervisor or manager. Got to address sexual orientation and gender identity. This is a really weird area right now. It's been many years now since the Supreme Court of the United States has found that discrimination or harassment on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity is illegal. It's a form of sex discrimination. And that has been something, I incorporated in policies, long before the law changed, because again, we want people to be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of what their circumstances are. Now we have these executive orders that, suggest that there are only, two biological sexes, and transgender people don't even exist. But that's in direct contravention of what the law says and what the Supreme Court has said. So it's still really important that you raise the issue and make sure your supervisors and managers know what to do in these types of situations. We see more and more charges filed by employees who identify in the LGBTQ community every year, and I don't expect that to change. This is not about changing the hearts and minds of your workforce, right? This is about telling people, okay, you don't have to like your coworkers. You don't necessarily have to, get along with them. You might disagree with their lifestyle choices. I mean, I have some people that are like, I think they're going to burn in hell for eternity. And it's like, that's okay. You can think that. But when you come into this building, you're going to treat each other with respect and dignity, right? We expect that from everyone. We expect that from you. And sometimes people just aren't going to get it. And you're going to have to do the disciplinary and the termination thing. But by and large, people understand that, the golden rule, just because I don't like someone or I disagree with someone does not give me license to make their lives miserable. Having that conversation and giving some supervisors the tools to recognize these situations and to seek help from HR if they're a little uncomfortable wading through the situation, which I found it can be the case. But in these cases, we're talking about respect and dignity, and by and large, employees are going to get that. I come in and do training, and then I get a call the next week saying, oh my God, there's been a line of people outside my office ever since you've been here. What did we do? It's not a bad thing. I like to try to set a new playing field when I do the training, because sometimes, you've come into a role or the company's had problems in the past. Companies had problems with people saying and doing inappropriate things, or, engaging in a lot of those conduct that we saw on the other slide that, some people aren't really aware can contribute to a hostile work environment. It's nice to be able to say, look, today's a new day. I can't help you about a situation that happened 3 years ago, but, you need to trust me now. We have, new people in charge. We have a new harassment policy. We want to know that these things are happening. It gives you an opportunity to fix the problem first, which is what you want as the employer. Anytime we can, use that get out of jail free card, right? And hold employees accountable for not letting us have the opportunity to deal with the situation first is important. There should be no chain of command when it comes to reporting harassment or discrimination. Now, this might blow your mind, but when I talk to supervisors and managers, I tell them, if any of you receive a complaint, see something, hear something, even if it's hearsay, even if it's gossip, employees should feel comfortable going to any supervisor or manager, because all the supervisors and managers in this organization have been trained that if they become aware of a situation that's harassment or discrimination, they know they've got to report it to HR immediately. There might be, a female employee who's more comfortable going to a female manager if it's not her manager or his manager. We can't have a policy that says, if you reported it to the wrong person. So there should be multiple avenues to complaint. Supervisors and managers must understand that, they have obligations under your policy, and also understand there's no such thing as a confidential complaint of harassment. Okay. Many of us have probably had an experience where somebody comes to us and saying, hey, I'm not coming to you as my boss, I'm coming to you as my friend, or I just want to vent. I don't want you to do anything about it. I want this to remain confidential. We can keep the confidences of our employees in lots of different circumstances, but we can't when it comes to harassment or discrimination in the workplace. So your supervisors need to understand, listen, if an employee comes to you, runs into you in the grocery store and tells you about something, or, sees you at church, or, wants to have an off the record conversation, they have to be prepared to tell the employee, hey, I'm really happy that you felt comfortable enough to come to me with this situation. And there are lots of things I could keep confidential, but, I can't keep this confidential, and report it to human resources. I challenge my clients to rethink consequences. If I get a handbook or a policy that says we have a zero tolerance for harassment, and any employee who violates this harassment policy will be fired. I don't like that policy, because there is lots of conduct that, can be in the range of inappropriate behavior in the workplace, right? An otherwise good employee who made one, regrettable remark that offended somebody is very different than an employee who grabs another employee's butt. One's probably going to result in immediate termination, and the other, that employment relationship is salvageable. You talk to the employee, you let them know what they did was inappropriate. If you need to train them, if you need to suspend them, put them on notice that, if you do this again, you'll be terminated. So, I like the policy to have some built-in grace and to make sense, so that we're treating, conduct, for what it is, and not treating all conduct exactly the same. Another reason why I like that is most people who are experiencing harassment and discrimination in the workplace, they don't necessarily want to get their coworker fired. They just want the conduct to stop, right? And if Brittany is a great coworker and a good employee, and she's doing something that's inappropriate, I want to know that I can go to HR and they can kind of make the situation better and have a conversation with Brittany. But I'm probably not going to go to HR if I think Brittany's going to get fired. So that's another reason why I don't like that, the zero tolerance. You got to address retaliation. Okay, employees have to believe you when you say you can come to us with a complaint and you're not going to be targeted. You're not going to be retaliated against. And, we can say that in our policy, but we also have to have that conversation with supervisors because, I submit that retaliation is a natural human emotion. If someone's accused me of being a bad supervisor, someone accused me of, being sexist or racist, I'm probably not going to view them the same way as I did before, right? I'm probably going to be pretty upset about it. So we talk about during the trainings how to keep those feelings in check and have a business as usual approach with employees who have engaged in protected activity. Doesn't mean they can never be disciplined, doesn't mean they have some cloak of invincibility, but supervisors, managers need to ask themselves, am I making this comment on the evaluation, or am I making this recommendation with respect to a promotion or a demotion based upon an employee's skills, experience, qualifications, and job performance? Or am I still a little honked off that they had the audacity to, go to my manager and suggest that, I was being unfair or playing favorites? So it's difficult it's difficult to not have the feelings of retaliation, but understanding, okay, what are ways that you can write an evaluation of an employee? I had a case where the supervisor, after an employee had engaged in protected activity and complained about something the supervisor did, the supervisor put in an evaluation that that employee was, quote, not a team player. Okay. Well, it's my job to represent you and the supervisor. So we talk about that, okay, could that be evidence of retaliation? Yeah, it could be. Is it going to be a really uncomfortable conversation if the employee's lawyer takes that supervisor's deposition? Well, we all know exactly what you meant when you said Brittany wasn't a team player after she filed that complaint against you. So we talk through better ways of doing it. What if Brittany really isn't a team player? You know, what are better ways for you to convey that in an evaluation that are going to be much less susceptible to multiple interpretations and would make you much more comfortable if you get called out or deposed about the issue? How about this? You know, Brittany is not a team player, period. For example, on May 1st, this happened. On June 2nd, this happened. You know, being as objective as possible. We're always asked to make subjective evaluations of employees, but it really is beneficial for supervisors and managers to understand that, you know, yes, they can make subjective assessments, but to the extent that they can back those subjective assessments up with some objective facts, it's going to make it much less likely that they're going to get pulled into litigation. And it's going to make it much less likely that, you know, a specific comment in an evaluation is going to be held against the company or subject to multiple interpretations. So address retaliation, have severe consequences for retaliation if you find out that people have engaged in it. The last thing we want to talk about, and not every company does this, but I think that it's very important that, you know, the harassment and conduct policies should belong to everyone at your company. And, you know, employees should feel free to, I don't want to say police the workforce, but to feel deputized that they can do something if they see or hear or experience something in the workplace that's not acceptable. You know, a lot of employees don't understand that they can't go to human resources and complain if they're not the victim, right? But, you know, a lot of things can be offensive and unwelcome, even if it's not directed at a specific employee. So we want employees to know that they don't have to be the quote unquote victim of harassment in order to have some rights under the policy. And, you know, this bystander intervention is really interesting. You know, I've employed some of these things over my career. I've gotten much more comfortable doing it as I've got, you know, more gray hair and, you know, more comfortable in my own skin. But, you know, talking about the 5 Ds, distracting, delegating, documenting, delaying, and disrupting, you know, baby attorney Carrie might have heard something in a meeting that you know, one of my colleagues said that was not appropriate, or I could see by the other faces in the room that people were offended by the comments. And I probably wouldn't have said or done anything. But letting people know that, you know, it's okay to pull a colleague aside and say, you know, you really shouldn't be making comments like that. Or to talk to the individual who was the recipient of the comment. Hey, I'm really sorry that that comment was made. It was inappropriate. And, you know, sometimes I have to have those conversations with younger associates when our clients have made, you know, inappropriate comments about sex or race or things that are just offensive. So, you know, distracting, you know, if you see something that's going on between your coworkers, it's inappropriate, you know, interrupt, change the subject, you know, ask, you know, an employee, ooh, hello, you know, what time is it? Or what time was that meeting on Thursday? So, I mean, this is a very subtle way that no one will know that you are intervening or taking advantage of, you know, trying to be a good bystander, but it disrupts the flow of whatever is happening. You know, you can talk with other employees about the best way to engage in a situation. You can document the situation and take it to human resources. You can, you know, you have to be careful when you're deputizing people to disrupt. You want them to be safe, right? And you don't want them to freak out or be disrespectful themselves. But, you know, that's very different than saying, you know, that comment was really inappropriate. Or, you know, remember that training we just had? You know, you really shouldn't be telling jokes like that at work. And that's just not a you know, comment that a supervisor or manager can make. You know, it's everybody's culture and it's everybody's policy. And, you know, the best way to really make sure that, you know, there's a culture of accountability, is to invite the complaints and concerns from everyone, not just people who might be the quote unquote victim of a situation. So those are the types of elements I include in supervisor and manager training. Anybody have any questions about anything we've talked about? We've got a couple minutes, and I'll stick around if there are other questions.
So how do you perceive if it is the top person in the company?
You know, delicately, because ultimately you can only do what you can do. You know, I talk about, you know, CYA from my human resources managers a lot, where they are advisors and they can, you know, tell the owner of the company that, hey, you can't say that, this is inappropriate. And I would document that. I would put that in writing that that's your advice, because you don't want to be, you know, become part of a lawsuit because, you know, you've enabled this type of behavior. It's difficult also when someone, you know, in the executive team or the owner is accused of being the harasser. That's a situation where, you know, sometimes an attorney will come in and conduct the investigation, because nobody really believes that there's going to be consequences against the owner of the company. So, you know, having a third party, you know, come in and interview people, it will give the employee who complains and witnesses the belief that the company is taking it seriously. They're not just going to brush it under the rug because it was the president of the company. You know, they care enough about the situation that they brought somebody from outside in, and then you know, hopefully, you know, the company will make some changes based upon the results of the investigation. But that's always difficult. You know, I can provide lots of really costly examples of cases that went haywire because of, you know, things that leadership does, but the risks of litigation are even higher in that case if the comments are made by someone in the executive team or the president of the company. How many of you have done supervisor or manager training in the last 2 years? You should do it. You know, it will eliminate a lot of risks, and it will make sure that your supervisors understand, you know, that they have skin in the game here too, and that it's a really special responsibility to be a supervisor or manager, more than just, you know, a different title and not having to punch that time clock anymore. Well, thank you. It was my pleasure to be here this morning.
Thank you.